Welcome. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for what I think is going to be a fascinating roundtable on fast-moving consumer goods in a COVID-19 world. We have an amazing lineup of panelists here who are all experts in their field and looking forward to sharing their insights with you. Rather than eat up time by going through detailed bios, I'll leave you to look at their distinguished career histories on our forum. I thought we'd just get started on the topic. And what we're looking at today is kind of trying to explore the shifts that we've seen in consumer behavior as countries around the world have locked down, restricted movement during a global pandemic. And we've seen companies react quickly to this, and we're interested to know what changes might be permanent and what pre-pandemic behaviors might return. And we've seen everything changing from more people ordering food online, more people focusing on health, more people wanting delivery now. And what is interesting, I think, to kick us off is we will go and speak to Ram Krishnan from PepsiCo. Now, PepsiCo's had a very resilient performance during the pandemic. They've launched a direct consumer website, but their CEO has also said that while they're experiencing growth, they expect some pre-pandemic behaviors to return. So Ram, I think we'd all be interested to hear what PepsiCo's experience has been and what you think is happening with the consumer now in a post-COVID-19 world.
Thank you, Deirdre. So food and beverage comparatively was the low penetration category in e-commerce going into COVID. What has been fascinating, and part of it is both an issue both on the demand and the supply side, because on the supply side, the economics never worked out on the food and beverage. So what we've seen is obviously that fundamentally change and e-commerce accelerate dramatically. The good news is we had actually invested ahead of the curve in the e-commerce channel, be it marketing automation, direct ship, sales intelligence platform. So we were well prepared going into the post-pandemic, but the consumer adoption went through the roof. I think it's interesting to see, if we look back in history, there are a couple of times when consumer behavior fundamentally changes. When you think about the World War II and the acceleration of packaged goods, 2003 SARS, and the acceleration of e-commerce in China. And then here, when you look about post-COVID, I think this entire digital living has accelerated. So the big change for us is, to your point, we were well prepared, but we were able to capitalize on the demand during the COVID context. The two things we've done is we have also, in addition to the regular channels, we've also launched a couple of direct-to-consumer businesses, primarily to serve the tail of the business. We were having a hard time just servicing the core because of the demand. So where people wanted the need to go to the tail of the portfolio where they needed to customize, those were the offerings we were able to put through with the direct-to-consumer offering. And to answer your question, that was something we did in 30 days from start to execution. So it wasn't something we had planned for. And as far as your question about what are the behaviors we expect to see come back, I think the fundamental thing I would tell you is, well, digital is here to stay. I think there's going to be, consumers' expectation is they will expect both the best of the online and the in-store format. I don't think it's going to be an either or. So if I think about it on online, going into the pandemic, online in most of the world is a much more of a black and white. It's mostly built for efficiency. It's not built for experience. And I think that you're going to see it change, because I think people are wanting to engage in highly engaging digital virtual storefronts. They want to be entertained while they shop. They want to have a social experience. So I think the role of physical stores might change, but people would still go into physical stores. I think here they're looking for more for an experience and an education, not just a transaction. So I think so we do see the physical store continue to retain importance, but the role would change on how people use these two channels. Mm-hmm. So hopefully that helps.
No, absolutely. Sharon Lighty from Vitamin Shop, you've obviously got stores and online. I'm interested in what you thought of Ram's thoughts there, where he's talking about this kind of blurring of the worlds of online and physical retail.
Yeah, similar to what I think many retailers saw, many businesses saw through the pandemic, this acceleration of digital. And what I always talk about is being where the customer is. No longer is it about putting something in place and the customer's coming to you. You have to go to them in whatever channel, in whatever forum. And certainly speed to market is a huge part of that. In our business, I think people are much more concerned about their health and making sure that, what they lost through the pandemic is something they don't lose again, and just having a much better awareness of taking care of themselves. So we've gone from selling vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, elderberry, all of the things around immune health, to now people are trying to, getting outside, maybe realizing they were inside a little too long and want to get outdoors. And we're seeing people move back into fitness. But what's interesting is that the immune side of the business is still very popular, because I think of this real focus on health and wellness. And then I do want to mention, go back to what Ram said about speed. I do think that, the consumer wanting it now is really still very important. And I think that's a behavior that's here to stay. But I do think that there is a desire to have real human connection. And in our business, being educated and knowing what people are taking and ingesting and how it's going to impact, what we're seeing in our business is customers really coming back to stores because they want to talk to real people. And at some point you get tired of just talking to a digital device. And so it's exciting to see that what we did and what we were able to accelerate through the pandemic with things like 2-hour deliveries and things of that nature, that's still here to stay. But we're also seeing that people want to talk to others.
Absolutely. And do you think, when you say speed of delivery is here to stay, will that still be the case when we're all back working in offices and, going out and visiting people? Partly it was because you had people trapped at home and it was easy for them to get deliveries throughout the day. But I'm interested if, and other panelists, please feel free to jump in if this demand for speed is here to stay, because it's often very expensive for companies and difficult to actually achieve this in an effective manner.
Yeah, we're still seeing the demand very, very high, and I don't see that that's going to, I don't see that going away. It's not accelerating the way it was, obviously, when we went into the pandemic, but I am seeing it very consistent from what had been our traditional highs. So I do think speed to market and making sure, again, you can be where the customer is when they want it is an important part for businesses going forward.
Also, if I can add to that, if you look at different regions, I think the US or the Middle East was known for very fast grocery delivery, food delivery. European market, sometimes you need like 2 or 3 days, and then you can book a window where within 3 hours your grocery are delivered. So it was quite behind the curve, and now with all this new economy player popping up, will deliver in 10 minutes. So personally, I don't think it has to be 10, and probably the panel is like going back a bit, but maybe it's a 25, 30 minutes. But people get used to it and get used to this convenience of being able to get what you want quite fast. But I also agree, when we always talk about omnichannel, but I also think omnichannel will be much more lived now, because as you actually said, we want to meet people, but probably there are also more modern, retail formats out there, autonomous stores. We see them quite popping up across the world. So probably the chance that you can either your order at home, you can on the way back maybe just check in with your app and grab and go without even paying interaction. And you have stores which probably provide more experience, more local community products, right? More sustainable products. So differentiating factor which are really worth going to shop instead of ordering it.
But how are companies, do you have to develop this delivery capacity yourself? We've seen lots of companies, like, for example, in Britain, we're seeing grocers teaming up with delivery apps like Deliveroo and Just Eat and Uber Eats. Is that the way forward? We're going to see much more kind of connection between these kind of fast delivery apps and companies, or do companies need to develop this kind of ability to service these demands themselves?
Honestly speaking, Deirdre, Mondelez, absolutely. That's what we're looking at. I'm sure everybody else is as well, because, and it depends where. It isn't one size fits all, because we were having a conversation off air and we were talking about this need for getting things in 8 to 10 minutes. Well, you need to have the resources and the infrastructure available in the environment that you operate in order to be able to do that in the first place and continue it. And not everywhere around the world is like that. So I think it will remain, people get used to it and people see the opportunity. They're going to want things as quickly as they can. But at the same time, it will depend on how you can actually set your infrastructure up. And it needs to be through partnerships as well. You cannot, the expense, I think, of doing it and the lack of expertise some of us have in some areas doesn't play well. We should really be connecting with partners to happen. And then I was just going to quickly build on the conversation that Ram started. I think one of the things we've definitely seen, which has impacted us massively, is around the consumers through COVID wanting brands they trust and they know. So knowing where things come from, knowing how it operates, knowing what the brand stands for has become even more important for, I'm sure others have picked that up as well, has become really important during the last 2 years, year and a half for our consumers. So we've seen a skew to much more, loved, cared for, people understand it, and an ask for more transparency in what we're doing with it. So I think that will continue as well, because we've educated the consumer through digital to enable them to be able to do that. And we should be showing transparently what we do. I just wanted to make that as well. So I think that's quite important on the trust piece with the consumer.
Mm-hmm. No, that definitely sounds right.
We're seeing something very similar to what Sandra is describing in the wine and spirits industry, where, previously you don't necessarily think of wine and spirits as a health staple, but consumers are very interested now in the ingredient makeup. Belvedere is all natural. Before, no one really cared. Now they really want a pressure test. Well, what does that exactly mean? Are you certified organic? We hadn't had such consumption of this sort of information online previously. And to the conversation about delivery, what we're also seeing coming out of the pandemic is sort of a different usage occasion emerge, where people are really entertaining at home. So we've always thought of the industry as off and on premise in terms of consumption. Now we're talking about home premise, where people are confident in making cocktails and entertaining at home much more than previously. So some of these behaviors that have started in the pandemic, we really see as cascading forward as we come out.
Rodney, are those behaviors across the board, or is it in a certain demographic of your customers, like millennials or baby boomers, or is this kind of pretty much across the board?
Well, when we look at the West in terms of North America, Europe, Japan, we see some very similar behaviors. I would also throw out that there's a huge angst for physical, social connection. And we thought in many places where lockdowns were ending that we would see a big shift from the home delivery off trade back to the clubs, bars, and restaurants where they could open. And in fact, the off trade is remaining very strong as the on premise is coming on. So so we are seeing some shifts in behavior, and we're seeing them across the board.
Yeah, I agree with you, Rodney. That's exactly what we're seeing. And interestingly, in some parts of the world, we're seeing people want both. They want the e-commerce proposition, but they also want to go to more convenient stores, less hyper stores sometimes, to meet the people, as Sharon was saying. I just want to see and I want to feel and I want to be around people. So that's a mix. So I think we've got great acceleration of what was going to happen and the complexity of dealing with it, which is fantastic because the consumer's at the center.
I want to maybe come back to indeed what has changed or what has significantly changed. And also Sharon was saying the focus and the awareness of consumers around the world on how to strengthen their health and their well-being. The part of the world that I'm responsible for Danone in Africa and Asia, unfortunately, the pandemic is far from being over, and the situation is still very, very urgent and concerning in many, many countries. And so what we've done over the last number of months is really to accelerate our One Health commitments that we have in these countries and fortify many of the products with zinc, vitamin D, vitamin C, and make them also accessible to the larger number of people. Because what we also need to realize is that in big parts of the world, a lot of people have really reduced income levels, and accessibility has become a huge concern as well. So speed on the one hand maybe is relevant in some parts of the world, in Africa and Asia. What is really crucial is that we can deliver the health and the functional benefits that people are looking for to strengthen their health and to protect themselves, but also at affordable price points for them and their family. And that's a huge challenge and opportunity for companies like us.
That is interesting. We've obviously got quite a dichotomy in the world now, where we've got, Western economies which are, very close to getting largely vaccinated, and then large parts of the world which aren't vaccinated. And there's obviously a lot of global focus on vaccine inequity. But how does that change? Because a lot of your companies are global corporations operating in these areas. I mean, how does that change your strategy for when you're kind of targeting consumers there? I mean, is it a big shift? Are you kind of changing how you're operating there because of, issues of vaccine inequity, or maybe you're not? I'm interested in how, I guess, vaccine inequity might be impacting your business.
Yeah, and maybe I can start with that. I mean, for example, a country like Indonesia, where we have 15,000 employees and more than 2 million people are 100% reliable on the Danone ecosystem for their incomes. And we serve essential products such as water in a country where access to water is not common, but also specialized nutritional products that have been in huge demand, in particular in the pandemic. So for us, a key priority was to keep the business running, but whilst keeping our people and the people in the full ecosystem safe. And the team has developed an incredible set of protocols and ways of working already from the beginning of the pandemic. And I'm proud to say that after 1.5 years, we still have never had to stop any part of our operation. But it has been a very, very big piece of work, working very closely also with the local stakeholders, with the local communities, making sure that people are protected and stay safe. At the moment, we are accelerating also with the help of the government in a private sector funded vaccination program, in particular for the private companies, but also for the essential businesses, so that we can ensure ongoing supply through the whole ecosystem, not only our own employees, but also the rest of the ecosystem, to make sure that people are safe and essential supply can continue. But it's become a very different part of your normal working operations in order to keep your people safe and the environment that they operate in safe as well.
I could probably build a bit on Corinne's points. To your question of, does it make a difference where in the world? Obviously, our first piece as well, which I'm sure is the same for everyone, was protecting our people to make sure that the frontline workers could actually do what they need to do and to keep the business going, including sales and supply chain, and particularly manufacturing was a massive piece for us. In Mondelez, we're pretty. We came through, or we are going through the pandemic in a robust way, a bit like Ram is seeing. We're seeing uplift in everything. Some of this is because we're actually a very localized company. So we have a lot of manufacturing around the world, over 100 sites. And actually, we also go local with our consumers. So we have our big global brands, which are the wonderful Oreo and all those kind of things. And we also have local brands that are actually more in line with what the local people can actually afford to buy. So there is I think this is where it benefited some of the companies where we manufacture across the globe. Is that we have been localized. We didn't have some of the issues that people had with China when you couldn't get the technology industry really struggled with that. We didn't have that because I think, like some other people on the call, we are very global in our nature, but local in our propositions, apart from the big brands that everybody wants.
Yeah, I think shopping local, buying local is becoming, another trend. So we are seeing a lot of localization of industry. But just a slight shift. I'm interested, Abdullah. I'm interested in what your experience has been. I mean, the Qatar Free Zone seemed to have managed to grow the number of licensed businesses during the pandemic, and just interested how that's, how you've managed to do that, but also what how the pandemic is changing, I guess, how the free zones operate.
Yeah, thanks. So I mean, I think the way we think about it is we look at I'd say the who, the where, and the how. So if we talked a lot here about producers and consumers, and so if you look at the big companies, the big producers, the question of where, I think, was really and we mentioned lots of supply chain reconsiderations. So a lot of big producers were really thinking deeply about, where do they produce, where do they store, how do they supply markets, from where do they supply markets, and so things around. So we saw, for example, in Qatar, for example, we have with Qatar Airways and the big air transport capability that Qatar Airways has. For a lot of people, that became a very new trade route that they hadn't really considered before. So things around vaccines, air cargo, all of a sudden became much more interesting to a much broader range of producers. And so the question of big companies rethinking their where for us was very beneficial. At the same time, there's a different. We also saw the rise of a different player. So the people that maybe what we've called consumers here before, all of a sudden becoming producers to an extent, or at least traders or businessmen, and their mode of operation is very, very different from from the bigger producers. So for them, they come to the market with using the tools of consumer electronics. So all of these social media, all of the expectations that come with that, they're bringing it now to the world of, if you will, B2B. So what for big companies is supply chain management. For them is friction, right? So things like customs and shipping and logistics and all of these things they see them in a very different way. So that 5-minute delivery that they expect for their food or for their goods, they're now also expecting as part of their own supply chain. And so again, as the free zone here, we're seeing a lot of interest and a lot of increased demand from people that really are new to the business or to the business world, or new to kind of, I would say, trading and product distribution and even to an extent manufacturing, and they're really going about this in a way. And so from our perspective, being a new free zone, we've been able to really leverage both of these two trends. And going forward, I think what's very interesting is for me, and I know Fabian can also speak to this, is how, especially on the supply chain and the logistics, how the small players, if you will, are going to be able to adapt and use and the tools that they need in order to be able to participate in these global supply networks.
Yeah.
And you think
to that.
Sorry, go ahead, Fabian.
Because COVID was like a stress test on the entire logistics value chain, right? It showed the vulnerability at some aspects where it didn't expect it, right? There was just one port in Africa again, which had 3 COVID cases. Now 100,000 boxes are stuck for another couple of weeks. So you see companies really rethinking it on one hand, thinking about like more diversity in the value chain, like a split of more local, regional manufacturing, being it food or other products, right? Even manufacturing of consumer goods or industrial products have an issue. At the same time, if you look at the air sea cargo, and that's what also Abdullah mentioned, if you look at the Qatar Airways, because you saw the rates for container from Asia to Europe, they quadrupled, right? Like it used to be $2,000, now it's $10,000. So suddenly you have to think also much more into shipping versus air cargo and replacing certain cargo streams. So with advantages of speed, of course, but also with the different price aspect, but also the differential got totally different. So logistics chains have to be much more dynamic, not only whether it's globally or regional, but also which mode of transport you take. At the same time, we talk about many smaller retailers or small enterprises getting to the business. I mean, in the past, if you look at logistics was very complicated, paper-based for small entity, very complicated to organize their own logistics. Today, you have all these platforms, you have e-commerce, you have much more transparency, which means it's much easier also for regional, for smaller players to get into the market. These entire market entry barriers are not there anymore to the same extent. Of course, economies of scale still play a role, but this means as a small regional manufacturer, and Rodney, you talked about also spirits. I mean, even in Germany, there's so many different gins coming up suddenly, from Black Forest to where you would also have thought, how can they market it? Because social media, right, is coming one of the main areas to market it much faster. So also surprised and at a high premium sometimes, even you pay more than established brands. So it's really interesting what happens on the small brand scheme. I think 50% of the growth globally also came from small brands, but this even better. So that's dynamic and probably also push for small and medium-sized enterprises possible through digitalization, and COVID might be even an accelerator of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, for the what we're seeing for the smaller players, for them, their main interface with the world is Instagram or Facebook or whatever it is, and they expect everything else to follow, right? So they're looking for solutions which really for them it's I put a photo of something on Instagram and I sold it. Now I expect somebody to take care of everything else from manufacturing, shipping, customs, distribution, and final delivery. And so that expectation is in my I think it's very interesting to see how far that can drive the technology and how far that can drive all of these enabling platforms, including for us the regulatory platform, the logistics enabling platform, and so that for us is something very interesting.
I think that's an interesting thing is how we've seen commerce. I think we talked about this, so e-commerce is becoming more of a social commerce, where a lot of transactions are happening in the social ecosystems. You think about the advent of live streaming, personalized video streaming. I mean, it's just fascinating how now shopping is a group activity, even if it's a virtual, it's not you're not doing it alone from your home. We do see that, and I think earlier on we were talking about how it's also breaking down category definitions, because when I'm on my Instagram feed, I'm not specifically shopping for one category. I'm looking through my lifestyle and I'm looking at all the products which appeal to it. So it's a fascinating world, as Abdullah talked about.
But a lot of these trends, were already here before the pandemic. Obviously, the pandemic has turbocharged it. But do you think there's anything that is really unique, like some real change in consumer behavior that has come about of the pandemic, or is it simply just been an acceleration of trends that were already in motion?
I think for sure.
To anyone who has a thought.
I think if I may, and it was mentioned before, the importance of localization from a consumer perspective, but also from a government perspective. I mean, we see huge shift to preference for local products, but also geopolitical challenges that we face. So being local with localized production, localized supply chains, but also being able for consumers to understand where products are coming from, transparent labels, is going to be far more crucial than ever before. And this is also really building on trends that were already there, like acceleration of plant-based, more flexitarian type of lifestyles. And again, all at affordable prices. But it also means that as companies, it's not only about localization, it's also about how do we implement the right practices locally in terms of regenerative farming, how do we protect the local food chains and the local supply chains to do that in a very sustainable way. And I want to connect that also with the shopping habits that we just discussed, the online acceleration of online shopping for sure. Obviously also comes with a huge increase of plastic waste, and I'm really wondering, and I think, well, not only wondering, but I do hope that all the big players, because we are all part of this, are going to work very actively to deal with that and make sure that online shopping becomes also sustainable and circular, as we're doing in our let's say traditional offline supply chains. And one example that I found really interesting we did with Danone in Indonesia is that we work together with Grab, which is one of the large home delivery services. And we use actually their infrastructure and their motorbike riders to take back the plastics that they have at home. And we use those collected plastics to go back into our packaging. So that way we also we were able to collect more feedstock for our circular supply chain. And I think these kind of models is what we also need to develop locally to make sure that things remain sustainable for the local environment as well.
I couldn't agree more, Corinne. It really is about localization, but transparency of where you do that. And I think we're in similar companies. You have a global brand piece that you need to manage in one way to make sure everything is transparent and clear. And then you have the localization piece that, how can you support the community? How can you make things work? We've got Cocoa Life, which is all around, looking after, working with farmers to have better technology. And that is really transparent now. And, we need to own how we work that through. I think more and more of that is coming through and has been accelerated as a result of people being at home, understanding what's happening. It's the right challenge for big companies like ours as well. I think you're spot on, Corinne. We have to be together to actually make the change. And I think that's why you see a lot more conversation going on between global and large FMCG in particular, that we're in about what can we do in this then, what should be, because we can't do it alone. And gone are the days. It's an interesting dynamic that's happened with companies where we start working more and more together versus, it's a competition against each other. In some cases, it's not. It's for the good of people and the planet, and we should be focusing on that.
And I think it's become a consumer imperative. We talked earlier about some of the demographic or generational differences. One thing that millennials and Gen Zers have brought to the table is an expectation that sustainability be acted upon immediately. We are bringing online, we brought online this year, a biomass capture facility at our distillery where we're actually taking the steam and the heat and creating green energy from it so that we're energy carbon neutral by the end of the year. Normally that would be sort of an esoteric aspect to the business. Now that is something that consumers are very much interested in. And I think what will continue to emerge are third-party sort of validators to help consumers sort through, greenwashing from real meaningful progress. We talked about logistics earlier too, in terms of the whole footprint of the product, especially global products, and what the degree of offsets are in place to make up for the impact on the planet.
Yeah.
And also, Sandra, your point.
Sorry.
I think the waste topic is the unsolved topic, because as home delivery is increasing, then you have cooking meals, right, which are packed like in 10, 20 separate entities. And I think everyone works on it, but there's still not the solution, right? The solution which doesn't impact the customer experience, meaning that you get it someone like hard paper bags and not plastic. And I think that will be one, probably also a joint solution, because now every food delivery company is working on it, consumer goods companies are working on it, but that could be even a cross stakeholder topic in the interest of the environment to tackle.
Yeah, and I think one connection that we're seeing that maybe isn't called out well enough here, but this connection with wellness, Sharon, to the vitamins and everything, connection with wellness and sustainability is actually bigger than maybe we all think, because we talk about them separately, but actually if you look at where does my product come from, what's in it, is this good for me or not, they're actually intrinsically connected there, and you have to sort of build them together to say, if I'm going to make a change here, what does this do for either the sustainability or the wellness category? Because they're huge now, they're growing. We have definitely accelerated that in the last 18, 24 months, actually.
So there's been a lot of conversation about, speed to market around, deliveries and things like that. I do think that, this whole conversation of speed also relates to innovation as well. I think that the acceleration, if you even just the conversation about how quickly a vaccine came about. So I do think, the consumer is going to expect change. And where, many of us are in, product development type categories, the old timelines are gone too. So I think, as leaders in businesses, we also have to think about how is everything accelerated, and how do we make sure we put products in front of customers based on what their needs are today.
That's a great point, what Sharon said. I think that's one of the permanent changes that's happened is the innovation cycle has dramatically changed. In fact, we've pivoted to this process called quick cycle innovation, where we look at search data, social data, and sales data to reverse engineer what the product should be. And it's completely compressed the innovation product cycle. And to Sharon's point, I think you see that happening in many categories.
Yeah.
Do you think there is a danger that in this rush to react really quickly to this, kind of unique situation we've been in, that companies might adapt, put a lot of money into areas that, maybe in another 24 months' time are less important, either investing huge amounts in delivery capacity or new product development? So I'm interested, if there's any insight into, when you're in such a unique situation, how as a company do you figure out what the right path is and where to direct resources? Because I feel that there will be some companies, maybe delivery platforms that emerge, and some of these companies may not be here in 2 years' time because maybe the market hasn't changed as much as we thought. Maybe
the one thing,
you could talk a bit about that. Yeah.
The one thing not specific to the delivery company, on the product development cycle, I think what we're doing more and more of is digital testing. So we don't do product launches, big bang national or international product launches. You're able to test in an online context, get consumer feedback, and iterate before you scale up. So I think that's one thing which is here to stay. So the cost of failure is not as expensive as previously.
Rodney, I'm interested in your thoughts on this, because you were talking a lot about how we're all mixing cocktails in the home, which, I mean, sounds great, to be honest. But do you not think as more, as the vaccine rollout and people become a bit, more comfortable with going out, that might change? So, have you had to invest more to kind of tailor to that kind of off market, or has it not involved like huge amounts of investment and you could quickly switch back to on trade?
We are seeing a huge interest in the on-trade, and in places where things have opened up, the consumers are back force. So there's both the need for social connection, for immersive experience that people really missed, as well as a sort of curated experience with product that, aside from the really practiced home cocktail makers, some people still feel that there's a role for mixologists, bartenders in their life. But I think, the underpinning force here is that there is an overarching interest in quality at the end of the day. And, to what Ram and Sharon were referencing about the innovation cascade, underpinning that has to be extraordinary quality, because the consumer has so much access and is really able to experience trial driven by themselves versus having it in our industry, directed by a bartender or a sommelier. That the product quality needs to be in place.
And I think as well, just to comment on that, I think, and many have said it before, that the pandemic in a way has accelerated some of the things that we as companies were already working on. And this is here to stay. So for us as Danone, with One Planet, One Health being our frame of action, in the end of the day now, with the consciousness and awareness of people, the importance of health, and in particular in the let's say more poorer countries, the importance of taking care of the health of your children, supporting their immune system, to products. The products that we are driving now much faster and that are much more in demand in countries like South Africa, Algeria, Morocco, are our fortified products at an affordable price, because people have become more aware, and this is not going to stay only with the pandemic. And I think on top of that, with the localization and making sure that we do it in a more transparent way with local networks and local communities to support also the economic growth and rebound after the pandemic is really, really crucial. And that is not going to stop or be over in 1 year from now. So for us, One Planet, One Health has never been more relevant than ever before, and has helped us to accelerate the strategies we had and make them even more impactful and relevant in the areas where we operate.
Yeah, I would say that for us, actually, so ours is empowering people to snack right, and that's really been pulled to a fore in the last 18 months or so, for all the reasons that we've talked about. I think the other interesting thing that we've done is where it's got more complex, on the balance, what we've said, and I suspect others have done the same, we said, well, what can we simplify? What don't the consumers need that we've created or generated that can actually come out of the system now, that enable us to be able to do more of what they do want? So again, this simplification, but connected to what the consumer needs, has helped throughout the whole of the chain. You talk about the value chain rather than the supply chain. You're marketing directly to something that people want rather than maybe what we've assumed people want, and I'm sure many companies have been in that place, but we've actively gone after simplifying so that we can empower people to snack right, and if you hold those mantras, then it does change your business dynamic and source the complexity from within your business by simplifying what you don't really need. Yeah.
And sometimes simplification for the consumer is not necessarily simplification for us.
No.
So
True.
we've launched organic infusion vodkas this year, and the yield from an organic rye field is 3 to 5 times less than a natural rye field. So on our end, our life is a lot more complicated internally, but for the consumer, the proposition is so simple. The ingredient list, just rye, artisanal water, all validated with being organic, as well as the botanicals and the herbs. It is very simplified. Yeah, it's sort of it can be a mixed bag here.
I agree.
Well, to ask a slightly grubby question, with all this investment and change and simplification, I mean, for consumer goods going forward, is there going to be a lot more pressure on profit margins as you kind of adapt to this changing world and people wanting stuff right now delivered in minutes? Maybe Rodney or Ram could tackle that. I mean, PepsiCo must have a really good view on how much this is going to put pressure on margins.
I think all of us are going to have margin pressure, right? I think especially when the last mile delivery is happening for free, somebody's got to bear the bill, right? Whether us or the retailer. I think the challenge is to, really manage your product mix. I think there's an ability to now get into premium space that it's growing in almost every part of the world. And then to Sandra's point, really take out a cost in the system where you don't need to. Simplification of SKUs. We have reduced the number of SKU assortment dramatically. So I think those are the things which we have to manage. But yeah, I think all of us are going to be challenged as far as profitability as we go into this last mile delivery.
Yeah, not only that, just the pressure that I think we're all having on wages and what you're seeing there as well. So I think it's up and down the P&L right now. And so, simplifying, taking out waste, just the continuation of that, I think that also is accelerated because of some of these additional costs that companies are bearing today.
If we look at home delivery today, well, it's also not profitable because it wouldn't be there wouldn't be so much venture capital out there. And you see the variations, which are ridiculous, right? If you compare to established businesses, so which means at a certain point of time, you ask it, probably many players will disappear because many players are not even there to stay, just to probably be sold into, to be merged, right? So it's more like a short-term game to make some money. And then the question is really, how does a new normal develop, right? Is it that the average basket is going up to 20, 30 euros, where it might make sense and we have more consolidated and high utilization of the drivers? Then it can make sense to a certain point of time, but then probably it's also not the 10 minutes, because 10 minutes means the drivers are waiting in front of the shop, right? And they're not fully utilized, so it's also not sustainable in the long run. So that's why probably the players pushed out of the system. Maybe the basket is growing a bit, the value chain is getting more professionalized. Then maybe also consumers are willing to pay, and it doesn't have to be 10 minutes, but maybe 30 minutes, and then can become something more sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, it is funny how many people are out there subsidizing pizza delivery and and delivery. It's quite a lot of money going to that. But at the same time, there's a lot of people that are joining whether because they want to or because they're forced to. There's a lot of new market coming on, so we're seeing a lot of interest in different markets, whether it's in African markets or so forth. And a lot of people joining the production areas. So all of these people that are choosing not to work in companies and opening their own things. So I think it's, who knows how long that will last. As long as the venture capitalists are there, I think, let's see.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think this whole question about how to make delivery profitable is being held in many different markets throughout the world. But we're nearly coming to the end of the session. So I would like to thank all of our panelists today. I think it's been a really fascinating conversation. And I think some of the key interesting trends that have come out from this discussion is that the consumer adoption of digital is here to stay, and it's something and companies need to realize that and adapt to that. But at the same time, we've got a blending of the digital and physical worlds. So, companies have to think about their online experience as well as their offline experience. They also have to be aware that the consumer is demanding and they want things now. That is the key thing that I've learned from today, but that's leading to really interesting partnerships, localized manufacturing, companies reassessing the supply chain, and of course also the innovation pipeline, which of course is the absolute bread and butter for a consumer company. And of course, trust in brand has never been more important. I would say it's always been something that's very important, but more so now than ever. And the consumer is focusing on quality of product, sustainability, and trust in the brand. So I'd just like to say thanks very much. It's been a fascinating discussion, and I'm sure we could have talked for much longer.